So today I'm going to talk about the Supporter Shield curse. And I know throughout these last couple of weeks I've been talking about the Supporter Shield curse and why it seems like it is definitely a thing. And today I'm going to kind of prove it, looking at the last 15 Supporter Shield winner and how only 3 of them would actually went on to win MLS Cup. And in fact, when I look at it, I think of those 3 teams that went to MLS Cup, they of course won the game. So technically, out of the 12 out of the 15 last Supporter Shield winner, they didn't even get to MLS Cup. So we'll talk about some of these teams, and obviously I won't go too much detail in terms of talk about some of the team like in the mid 2000 or in the 2010s, because I didn't really start following MLS probably around this time. I kind of started to follow MLS a lot, and obviously the last couple of years I've definitely followed MLS more extensively. So the first couple of years I won't exactly know what of course happened, but one thing I know is that during the early days of MLS, you don't really need that much points total in terms of winning the Supporter Shield. In fact, back in 2006 when DC United won, they had a record of 15, 10, and 7, and they of course won the Supporter Shield with just 55 points and a points per game total of 1.72. Though they lost, of course, in that conference final, and their head coach was Peter Norwak. In 2007, they of course won the Supporters Shield again. This time with a similar record of 15, 7, and 7. But this also I think was the year when MLS strangely decided that they're going to only play 30 games. So I think up to I believe 2011 or 2012. I think it was 2011. It might have also been 2010 though, but up to that point, MLS was only like at a 30 game season, and then prior to 2006 it was a 32 game season. And this is also why I point out the points per game total too, because when you look at the last 15 year of this league, pretty much the total amount of games did changes throughout the last 15 years. And in 2007 there was only 30 games that is played, but DC still won the same amount of games, and their points total was pretty much the same. But what's impressive is that they did it in a less amount of time, so their points per game total was higher at 1.83. But unfortunately that year they didn't even make it to the conference final. They lost in the semifinal, and their head coach was Tom Sorn. In 2008, this is one of the 3 teams that of course won MLS Cup out of the last 15 Supporter Shield winner, and that of course is the Columbus Crew with a 17, 6, and 7 record. They finished the season with 57 points and with a 1.99 points per game. They won MLS Cup against the New York Red Bulls, and Ziggy Smith was the head coach that year. Now in the very next year, the Columbus Crew went on to win MLS Cup again, but this time their record is definitely one of the worst in terms of Supporter Shield winner team. 13, 10, and 7, only 49 points total. I believe the only other team that have won with that amount of points, I think it was like somewhere back in 2004. It was a DC team that of course won, but their points per game was 1.63. Obviously, nowadays we know that they alongside with that DC team no longer share as the fewest amount of points to win Supporter Shield. That honor of course belongs to the Philadelphia Union. Though that being said, we know what happened in 2020 in that name redacted virus that basically caused the season to go such a havoc as it is. But we'll definitely get to that when we talk about the Union winning the Supporter Shield. But again, 49 points definitely not a lot. In fact, 49 points nowadays you are basically fighting for playoff position. But back then it was enough to win the Supporter Shield, and they had a points per game of only 1.63, and they of course lost in the conference semi-final, and Robert Retschake was their head coach after Ziggy Smith of course left to head coach the Seattle Sounders, who of course came into the league in 2009. Now in 2010, this is when the Galaxy started to kind of build their dynasty, as they won a Supporters Shield here with a record of 18, 5, and 7. Their points total was 59 points with a 1.97 points per game. Oh, just another note in terms of the 49 points that the Crew has. Even though I know that was a 30 game season, that is still very, very few in terms of trying to win the Supporter Shield. Like nowadays, you literally need to at least have 60 plus points to win the Supporter Shield, and maybe even more with the way that the points total for a regular season seems to be broken every single season. But going back to the Galaxy, of course, they finished with 59 points and have a 1.997 points per game total. But unfortunately, they lost to the conference final to FC Dallas, of all team in that conference final. And then, of course, Bruce Arena was the head coach of that team. The very next year, they, of course, won the Supporters' Shield again with a record of 19-10-5, but their points total was much higher because this is when the league started to go to a 34-game season. They finished with 67 points, have a 1.97 points per game total, and of course they are only the second of the 15 teams that I'm going to talk about here that actually went on to win MLS Cup. I believe they beat the Houston Dynamo in the 2011 MLS Cup, and I believe they were also playing at home in that MLS Cup, which, back then, this was before when the league decided that MLS Cup is basically hosted in a neutral venue, and I believe this is the last year they did so, and it just happened to be that they decided to play the neutral venue in LA and at what it was called Home Depot Park back then. But in 2012, well, I know what happened in 2012 because the San Jose Earthquakes won the Supporters' Shield, also known as the Goonies these days, when the Quakes basically grab late winners almost every single day and ride themselves into a Supporters' Shield winning team. And I know a lot of people will say that was probably one of the flukiest Supporters' Shield winner of all time, but in my book, I just think that, if you are able to get wins and if you're able to show that resilience as that Quakes team had shown back in 2012, I don't think it was by accident whatsoever. But they finished the season with a 19-9-6 record with 66 points and a 1.94 points per game. But unfortunately, they lost in the conference semifinal and they lost to the Galaxy in the first round. And I remember that was the year when they actually took the lead against the Galaxy, and they went down to LA, and actually, in probably the most Goonies ways possible, they grab a late winner to take a 1-0 lead in the first leg of the aggregate, heading back to San Jose. And yeah, that second game did not went well at Buckshare Stadium when they lost 3-1. But the great Frank Yalla was the head coach of that team. But then the very next year, this is when the Red Bulls started to kind of have a bit of a dynasty in terms of the Supporters' Shield, as this was the first of 3 that they would win in 6 years, with a record of 17-8-9 with 59 points and a 1.74, which back then that still seemed really low to win the Supporters' Shield. Though that being said, when Dallas won it in 2016, they also won it relatively low, and same with the Red Bulls team that won it back in 2015. But of course, unfortunately, they also lost in the first round in the conference semifinal, and Mike Pecky was the head coach of that team. I mean, people forget that Mike Pecky actually won a Supporters' Shield, despite the fact that, yeah, we know what happened to Mike Pecky, and his coaching reign has really gone down the drain after that incident that he had with RSL last year. But back in 2014, this is when the Seattle Sounders winning their first and only Supporters' Shield in their franchise history. I mean, people forget that as successful as the Seattle Sounders is, they only ever won one Supporters' Shield in their history. And again, I think that has a lot to do with the fact that they always like to finish second in the Western Conference every year. But back then, they actually did finish first not only in the West, but also first overall in the league. And they actually break the 20-win mark that year, 24-10 with a points total of 64 points, and had a 1.88 points per game. So, despite the fact that they did, of course, 120 games, they also lost a lot of game for a Supporters' Shield winner team. In fact, it's very rare you see a Supporters' Shield winner actually lose double-digit amount of game. And in fact, the very next year, the Red Bulls also did the same thing. But of course, they lost in the conference final that year. They kind of ran into the juggernaut that is known as the LA Galaxy. And Ziggy Schmidt, of course, was the head coach of that team. I mean, there's no doubt that if they did not run into that juggernaut of the team that is the Galaxy back in 2014, they would have definitely went on to win MLS Cup. But back in 2015, the Red Bulls, of course, won the very next year with an 18-6-10 record. Again, they're one of the rare teams to win the Supporters' Shield, despite the fact losing double-digit amount of games. They finished with 60 points and a 1.76 points per game, but they lost in the conference final, and I think it was Columbus, the one that they lost in the Eastern Conference final, and Jesse Marsh was the head coach of that team, and that was back when Jesse Marsh was still coaching here in the U.S. before going going to Austria and going to Germany to coach the other Red Bulls team. But in 2016, Dallas, of course, won the Supporters Shield, and this is also when we start to realize that, yeah, homegrown talent is actually something that you need to focus, because this was a Dallas team that has a lot of good homegrown kind of player on the team, and went on to win the Supporters Shield with a 17-9-8 record and had 60 points with 1.76 points per game. But unfortunately, they did lose in the conference final. They lost to the Sounders in that conference final, and Oscar Pereira, of course, was the head coach of that team. And in the very next year, this is when our third and final team out of the last 15 Supporters Shield winner that actually won an MLS Cup, and also the last Supporters Shield winner to win MLS Cup, and that, of course, was that Toronto FC team that was back then known as probably one, if not the best team that was ever assembled, with a record of 29-5 and finished with 69 points with a 2.02 record. Like that was the team that, remember, they had guys like Michael Bradley, Josie Altor, and Sebastian Javinko, and all those kind of attacking sources like that. That was just such a good team, and it's so sad the fact that eventually they did kind of disassembled it the very next year. But before that, they won MLS Cup, and Greg Venny, of course, was the head coach of that team. And then in 2018, the Red Bulls, of course, would win it once again, although that was the year where a lot of people thought Atlanta was going to win it. Like, Atlanta was actually leading the Supporters Shield for a very long time, and then the Red Bulls kind of just snatched it out on the very final day and finished with a record of 22-5-7. And what's even more impressive is that, I forgot to mention, with that TFC team, with how impressive they actually broke the regular season points total, only to realize the very next year the Red Bulls, of course, did it. And of course, Atlanta actually missed out on the Supporters Shield by just a single point. So the Red Bulls had to break the record if they were able to do it. That was one of the most exciting Supporters Shield race that we had down the stretch. I mean, I think you could say that probably is the most exciting when you look at the last couple of Supporters Shield winner, because it feels like the last couple of Supporters Shield winner, there really hasn't been a lot of contests in terms of that, but this was really down the wire. It was down to the final day in decision day. Well, actually, I take that back. I forgot about 2020 and how the Union also had a great battle for the Supporters Shield down the very final day against TFC. I'm pretty sure everybody would easily forget about 2020 and after what happened in that year. But nevertheless, back in 2018, that was definitely a great Supporters Shield winning race. But that being said, when you win the Supporters Shield, you're gonna get that curse, and unfortunately for the Red Bulls, they got that curse, and it seems like that Atlanta team was pretty pissed off that they did not win the Supporters Shield. So they got some revenge in the conference final against the Red Bulls, and hence the Red Bulls, of course, lost that conference final. And who would have thought that Chris Armas was the head coach of that team? Like, as much as how bad Chris Armas was at TFC, you gotta forget he actually did a good job for the Red Bulls. Now, that being said, a lot that the resource has to give credit to Jesse Marsh and the fact that he was kind of really taking charge of a Jesse Marsh team. But even then, it was kind of impressive the fact that he was able to, just took control of the Red Bulls in his first full season and guide them all the way to winning the Supporters Shield. Now, the very next year, we got even a stronger team, that is LAFC, and this was also a team that a lot of people said that it was the best team in MLS history, with a 21-9-4 record, and they finished with 72 points and had a 2.12 points per game total. Like, this team, there were people thinking that they could break the 80 points total, and ultimately they did kind of had a bit of a rough stretch down the stretch. But even then, everybody thought that this team was going to win MLS Cup, but they didn't. They lost to the conference final against the Seattle Sounders, and of course Bob Bradley was the head coach, and the whole, I feel better than Bob kind of moment happened in that game. And I forgot who, of course, says that quote. Oh yeah, that's right, it was Brian Schmetzer that of course says that quote. But nevertheless, if you were to talk about a team to that is so good to never win MLS Cup, or the best team ever to play in the regular season and never win MLS Cup, you gotta say LAFC is right up there. If not, they are the strongest team to never MLS Cup with how good that team with the likes of Carlos Vela and Diego Rossi operating up front. Then in 2020, you got the Philadelphia Union winning the Supporters Shield with a 14-5-4 record. And the Union, with the way that they won it, was kind of similar to how FC Dallas won it. They rely heavily on their academy and eventually got them to the top. But as we know, that was the year when everything kind of went into havoc, and there was only 23 games, and pretty much the league didn't, most of the team didn't even finish with the same amount of games as the Union did. Like, the Union was only one of the handful of teams that actually play a full 23 game season that they had. But nevertheless, they did finish with 47 points, which to this day is still the lowest amount to win Supporters Shield. But again, when you only had a 23 game season, that's what happened. And their points per game total was really good too, 2.04. But unfortunately, they do have the honor of being the first ever team to lose in the first round of the playoffs, as they lost to New England in probably one of the biggest upset in the playoffs that we've seen. Like, a lot of people were picking the Union to win that one, including myself, and it was kind of a shock, the fact that they were against New England. And I know New England was a decent team, and they kind of had some momentum coming into this game, but against a Union team that were 9-0-0 at home that season, and they suffered their first loss against the Refs, that was definitely a big shocker. Which that brings us to now present day with the New England Revolution, and this is where I also talk about a lot of comparison of the last year's Union team, where if you're the Refs, yes, you are the best team in the league, but the fact that it's been 3 weeks since you have last played, and in some cases some of their best players haven't played in a very long time. How are you going to maybe face against an NYCFC team that definitely has the momentum and definitely have some chip on their shoulder that this is finally the year that they make it past the second round? But nevertheless, we gotta look at their regular season. Probably, well, I wouldn't say probably, but it is indeed the best regular season that any team and any Supporters Shield winner has ever put. 22-5-7 record with 73 points, with a points per game total of 2.15, which is the highest amount ever, even higher than when not the Galaxy, but DC won it back in 1998. Or actually, was it the Galaxy that won it? I think it was the Galaxy that won it in 1990. That also had a really high points per game total, but the Revs, of course, smashed it. And of course, Bruce Arena winning his 4th Supporters Shield in that mark. But now the big question here with the question mark is, how far are they going to go? And this is where we're going to see on Tuesday, when they do play against NYCFC, whether or not if the New England Revolution becomes the latest victim in terms of the Supporters Shield curse. And I think with the way that the playoff format is, and especially with the way that it is now single elimination, and if you of course win the Supporters Shield, while it's great that you do get an extra week rest before you get to prepare for your playoff game, and you have one less game of course making it to MLS Cup, that also means that you are basically going to have more rust than any other team. And again, I'm very interested to see how this Revs team is going to look, and I'll mention it again in the preview, talk about how exactly the rust is going to factor to this team, because like I said, it's one thing to maybe have like an extra week of break, but it's another to have like a 3-week period where you didn't play a single competitive game, and you have to get ready for the biggest game of the season against a relatively hot team that is NYCFC. That is going to be a very difficult task, and I won't be surprised the Revs could be the latest victim of the Supporters Shield curse if they do not win that game against NYCFC. But let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this video? And also let me know in the comments below, do you believe in the Supporters Shield curse? Do you think it's actually a real thing? But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys do like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.